Hello, everyone. This will be part 2 of my What If Marvel Still Had the Rights to All of Their Characters Phase 4. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Kicking this video off will be the Black Panther sequel, which I will be calling Black Panther War of Kings. And in light of the news of Chadwick Boseman's passing, with all due respect, I would have T'Challa be recasted for another actor, as I believe that Black Panther is an important part of the Marvel Universe to just be killed off screen. So whoever they would recast to get T'Challa in this alternate universe, I wouldn't really mind, as long as they portray the character just as well as Chadwick Boseman did. And I would also recast the actor of Namor, since the original actor who portrayed him, I don't think he really embodied the essence of what Namor really is. And so the actor I will be choosing will be Chris Evans, as shown in the photo right here, as I believe he not only looks like a comic accurate Namor, but can also bring that level of intimidation that Namor has in the comics and that I didn't really see in the MCU version of Namor. And so this movie, if you watched my video of fixing Phase 5 of the MCU, I'd have this movie basically go down the same way as it did in that version. But the only change I would make is I would add Storm in this movie as well, since in the comics, her and Black Panther are basically a couple. And if you watched part 1 of my Phase 4 character rights video, and you would know that Storm left the X-Men by the end of the 4th X-Men movie, X-Men Hell to Pay. And so I would have her make her way to Wakanda, where she would meet with Black Panther, and both of them would develop a bit of a romantic relationship, which would develop further down the line. And she would also help him in his fight with Namor, but by the end of the film, I would have both Black Panther and Namor call a truce after witnessing the amount of death and destruction that both of their armies were facing. And this would turn Namor into somewhat from a villain to an anti-hero. So for right now, both Wakanda and Atlantis have a temporary truce. And the movie would end with both Black Panther and Storm, hand in hand, looking upon the Wakandan horizon. The next movie I have planned will be The Inhumans. And this movie would explore the origin of the Inhumans as well as the royal family. The villain I would have for this movie would be Black Bolt's brother, Maximus, and he aspires to take the throne. So this movie would basically be the 2017 TV show, but executed way better, and it would be in a movie format. I would also have this movie explore much of the cosmic side of the Marvel Universe, and which would actually get a Thanos cameo, but something that's not too out there, but just subtle enough to what we know would lead up to the big endgame of the saga. Now, the next project after this will be The Punisher Season 2. And this would still be the season finale, and it would roughly stay the same. Now, the next TV show following will be Heroes for Hire. And also similarly to my Phase 5 video, this would basically be a Luke Cage and Iron Fist show where they would take certain jobs in which they would hunt down criminals and basically take jobs for money. So this show would be a buddy comedy between both Luke Cage and Iron Fist, where we would get references to multiple street-level heroes such as Spider-Man, Daredevil, and Punisher. And the main villain I would have for this show would be the Purple Man. And if you don't know who he is, he was the main villain of Season 1 of Jessica Jones, and his power is basically to mind control people and make them do his bidding. So I feel like that would be the perfect street-level hero for both Luke Cage and Iron Fist to go up against. Speaking of Jessica Jones, I'd have her make a cameo in the last episode of this season, just to set up a future team up down the road, which we would know as the Defenders. After this will be the second Doctor Strange movie, which I will be calling Doctor Strange and the Nexus of Nightmares. And if you couldn't guess by the title, the main villain of this movie will not be Scarlet Witch, but will instead be Nightmare. So the way I would start this movie off would be us seeing a scene of Baron Mordo, who appears to be in a meditative type of state, and we would slowly hear him murmuring to himself. And we would shift into Baron Mordo suddenly in another realm, in which he is still in his meditative type of state, and he would slowly open his eyes, and the screen would pan up to the other side, revealing the figure known as Nightmare. Mordo would say his greetings, and Nightmare would as well, and this would give us the inclination that these two have met up before, with Nightmare remarking how Mordo must have a death wish if he's willing to meet up with him in his domain over several times, and Mordo would be unfazed by this response, and he would simply state that this is only for a means to an end on finally killing Doctor Strange and taking the title of Sorcerer Supreme. Nightmare would laugh at this, and Mordo would ask him if he has regained his full power yet. Nightmare would cease his laughing and would grimly remark that it is still a long ways to go before he is finally built up enough energy to be as powerful as he was once before. And Mordo would ask Nightmare what he needs to regain his previous strength. And I would use this scene to have Nightmare explain about the concept of the Infinity Stones, and says how one stone is capable enough to crush an entire planet, and remarks that he will need one, if not all, of these stones to return to his former glory. Mordo would say that he has no idea where these so-called stones are, and Nightmare would simply remark that he already has a stone, and it is deep locked within the Sanctum Sanctorum, wrapped around the necklace of Doctor Strange. Mordo would be confused for a second, but then remember about the Eye of Agamotto, or what we would know as the Time Stone. So Mordo and Nightmare would join forces in order to take the Eye of Agamotto, as well as killing Stephen Strange. So for this movie, I'd have it be similar to the comic adaptation, but a much better version, in which Nightmare would invade the dreams of Doctor Strange and basically force him to see visions of his origin over and over again, but in a much worse fashion than it actually was in his actual origin. And Doctor Strange is confused as to why he is having all of these nightmares all of a sudden, and he would visit his library as a means to find any references to his dilemma, until he would stumble across a book that would reveal the origin as well as the exposition of the being known as Nightmare. And so Doctor Strange would read this book and would finally decide to confront the being himself and enter into his domain. And Doctor Strange would also bring along Wong with him because, Wong's just that guy, and both of them would travel to the Nightmare realm using the sling ring. And the way I would portray this would have many horror elements in which you don't even know what to expect. And so I want the Nightmare realm to feel like this grim and dark place in which basically there is no hope. Kind of like that old saying, abandon all hope once you enter this area, I guess. I forgot. But while traveling through this realm, Doctor Strange and Wong would eventually encounter Nightmare, in which they would have a brief scuffle, in which Doctor Strange would ask Nightmare why he is invading his dreams, in which Nightmare would reveal that his goal is to snatch the Infinity Stone around Doctor Strange's neck, as well as enter the mortal world, in which he dreams to have full control over the humans. Doctor Strange would, of course, never let this happen and would continue to battle Nightmare along with Wong. That is until he is shot in the back, and Doctor Strange would turn around to see Baron Mordo. And Doctor Strange is surprised as he has not seen Mortal since the events of the first movie. And so Mortal and Nightmare would proceed to overwhelm both Doctor Strange and Wong. And Nightmare would snatch the necklace from Doctor Strange's shoulders. And Mortal would try to finish off both Strange and Wong. That is until Wong would grab the Strange ring at the last minute and transport themselves back to the Sanctum Sanctorum. And so Wong would think that they are safe now until he looks over to Strange and would see him convulsing. And it would appear that after the confrontation with Nightmare, Nightmare has somehow managed to get a hold onto Strange's mind and sees him as a vessel and his way into entering the real world. And so inside of Doctor Strange's mind, we would see a mental battle between both him and Nightmare, in which Nightmare is gaining the upper hand and is about to take full control over Strange. That is until Strange would remember all of this good memories about Christine, as well as his time with the Avengers and his time training under the Ancient One. And so with these memories, he would manage to suppress Nightmare and would manage to win the mental battle, for now at least. So Doctor Strange and Wong would try and configure a plan and trying to see what's the next move should be until they would hear a crash outside and they would run out to see a car that's crashed into the side of a building. And they would look on in shock and confusion as they would suddenly see people collapse. Not dead, but they appeared to be fallen into a deep sleep. This would of course give Nightmare free range, as this was his plan all along. And so with sleep comes with nightmares. And this is where we would see shadows encapsulating the city of New York and slowly transferring outside of the city. And it would be similar to the Nightmare realm. And Nightmare would be seen cackling, as this was his master plan all along. So Doctor Strange and Wong would look on with horror and would try and return to the Nightmare realm to defeat Nightmare once and for all. And amongst the real world, we would see these manifestations, creatures that would roam the streets, and we would see the remaining sorcerers of the Sanctorum proceed to defend the streets and defeat those creatures, whilst we would also catch Doctor Strange and Wong traveling through the Nightmare realm and confronting both Nightmare and Baron Mortal, in which they would proceed to have their final clash. Nightmare, who is much more powerful as he has managed to cast the world under a deep sleep, multiplying his power by thousands. And it would be a very tough fight, with Nightmare proceeding to have another mental battle with Strange, and Strange would have a much tougher fight this time, and Nightmare would almost proceed to overcome him. That is until Wong would distract Mortal and would manage to get the Infinity Stone back from Nightmare's clutches. This would weaken Nightmare enough to allow Strange to overcome him, and thus would let Doctor Strange and Wong defeat both the forces of Mortal and Nightmare. And so Doctor Strange would depart from the Nightmare realm, taking Mortal with him as a prisoner, and he would proceed to turn back to Nightmare and give him a warning that if he ever tries to mess with the mortal world again, he'll be back for him. And Nightmare, who is weakened in this state, would proceed to snarl at Strange and would reluctantly return back to his throne. And so Doctor Strange, Mortal, and Wong would head back to the Sanctum Sanctorum, in which they would see the city start to slowly reshape itself back to normal. And so Doctor Strange would see that the Infinity Stone around his neck is too much of a dangerous liability, and he would lock it in the downstairs vault of the Sanctorum. And they would also keep Mortal as a prisoner in the Sanctorum for his crimes. And yeah, the movie would end on a pretty somber note, with we would see Doctor Strange walking amongst the streets in a civilian attire, and we would see him consulting with an old friend. And now, the final movie of Phase 4 will be The Dark Avengers. And again, if you guys don't know about this team, it's basically a supervillain team in the comics that's founded by Norman Osborn, and it's pretty much a parody of the Avengers in a way, where they try to do good things, but in reality, they're really shady. So, kind of like The Boys superheroes, if you guys are aware of that show, where they basically pretend to be superheroes, but they're actually just a bunch of scumbags. So the movie would start with Norman Osborn in a meeting room, currently having a conference, and we would see him slowly start to daze off until one of the board members would catch his attention, and one of them would ask Norman if he was alright. Norman would respond that he's feeling fine, just a bit tired. We would then see a flashback of Norman Osborn inside of the Iron Patriot suit, and he appears to be on a mission with the other members of the Dark Avengers, such as Moonstone and Leader. And the two of them would confront Norman and asking them that they need a plan of attack. Norman would grin at them and say that he has a plan. Attack. This is when Norman would jump out of the helicopter and fly towards the action with his Iron Patriot suit. Down at the base, we would see a familiar person walking through, which we would know as Egghead. And we would see him in his lab, seemingly working on something. That is until an alarm would go off, signaling the arrival of intruders. And so he would arm his men and tell them to go forth and stop the intruders. And that would go as bad as well as you expect. And we would see Iron Patriot blast through the door and demand that Egghead come with them, as he is a threat to the country. And so Egghead, in response to this, would deploy his robots, who would give Norman a bit of a fight. That is until the rest of the Dark Avengers managed to break into the base as well, such as Moonstone, Bullseye, and Abomination. And with the combined forces of all four of them, they managed to subdue Egghead's robots and take him into custody. After this, we would cut back to Norman in the conference room, where we would also see Justin Hammer in the meeting as well. And it would be revealed that Oscorp has signed a joint venture with Hammer Tech as a way to further develop their technology and try and compete with Stark Industries. And so the conference meeting would end and we would see Norman start to walk out the room. That is until Justin Hammer would catch up to him and would ask Norman if he could speak to him for a second. Norman would reluctantly agree, and both of them would enter a private office where Justin Hammer would discuss the recent rise in supervillain activity and ask Norman what he plans to do about it. Norman would say that his team has it handled, in which Justin Hammer would scoff a bit, before handing him some files, remarking that there's also a new freak on the rise who calls himself Count Nefaria. Norman Osborn would look at these files in intrigue, and Justin Hammer would continue on saying that he also has a little team of his own who calls themselves the Lethal Legion. And we can hear a bit of sarcasm at the end of that sentence from Hammer. Norman Osborn would say that his team would look into it, and both of them would go on their separate ways. We would then cut to a castle in Europe, where inside that castle we would see a figure slowly walking as his cape would flow through the wind, and we would slowly see the figure's face, revealing the villain known as Count Nefaria. And he is seen walking into a room and is greeted by his soldiers, where he would proceed to say that the Americans has gotten too comfortable with disrespecting his name, and that now is finally the time to strike. And this camera would shift around. We would see familiar comic book villains such as the Living Laser, Whirlwind, and Ares. Count Nefaria would continue on, saying that it's finally time to strike back at those fools and remind them who the real person in charge is. The three members, as well as the rest of Count Nefaria's soldiers, would yell in unison, and we would then later cut into Norman Osborn having a meeting with his Dark Avengers, and the room would spread out, revealing the members such as Moonstone, Leader, Abomination, Bullseye, Sentry, Radioactive Man, and the Winter Soldier. And he's discussing what their next move should be and how they should take down this new threat, in which Abomination would remark how they should just deal with him how they deal with the rest of their missions, just punch their way in. Norman Osborn would say, "This is why I chose you, Blonsky. You punch first and ask questions later." Moonstone would also remark that she's not sure how long they should keep up this hero charade. Sure, it's fun to model for the public, but now it's just getting boring. And some of the other members would agree with this, such as Bullseye and Radioactive Man. Sentry would remain quiet, and it would look as if he's not even paying attention, as if he's off mentally in another world. Norman Osborn would slam his fist on the table, reminding these buffoons that if it wasn't for him, they would all still be rotting or be cast out as nothings, and it was him who brought them to the limelight. So he doesn't need them trying to ruin the reputation he tried so hard to build up, especially after that whole fiasco with Spider-Man. Bullseye would then remark, how the hell Norman even survived that encounter in the first place, as everyone thought he was dead. Norman would give his speech that he gave during the ceremony, in which Bullseye would call bullshit and tell him what really happened. Norman would stare at Bullseye for a second, and then reveal that apparently the goblin formula in his DNA managed to save him from being completely killed. Sure, he was impaled, but thanks to the regenerative factors of the formula, he miraculously survived and managed to take off his goblin armor before the police could arrive to his body and managed to slip away and watch events unfold from the shadows. Winter Soldier would ask if they're really doing the right thing, as now that he's regained his conscience as Bucky, he's more wary about his actions, especially for what he did in the past. And he joined this new Avengers team in order to try and repent for his sins. Abomination would remark, "I don't care what we do, as long as I get to smash people. And ever since the Hulk went into MIA, I've been itching for a challenge." Leader would then ask Norman, as blunt as Abomination made it, he feels that brute force would be the most optimal way into sending a message as well as defeating this new Count Nefaria. Norman, with a grin on his face, would then tell the team, "Let's suit up then." We would see Norman Osborn then later in his room, suiting up in his Iron Patriot suit, which we would then see Harry Osborn walk into the room, asking his father if he could talk for just a minute. Norman would dismiss him and tell Harry to go away, as he's about to go on another mission. Harry would stare just for a minute, and then would later leave the room. It was always like this. Ever since Norman seemingly came back from the dead, Harry has been trying and grasping at many chances to talk for his father one-on-one, but Norman would always dismiss him and would tell Harry that he has no time to have a sappy reunion, as he's a very busy man and he needs to get things done. After a while, we would hear a knock at Norman's door, and Norman, who seems to be very annoyed now, will tell Harry to leave him alone and not bother him unless it's important. But then the door would open, revealing not Harry Osborn, but instead Sentry. Norman would ask Sentry what he wants, and Sentry would start to hesitate before saying that he doesn't think that he'll be able to participate in this mission, as the power deep within him is starting to get stronger, and he doesn't think that he can control all of it. Norman would scoff and say that there's nothing to worry about, as Norman would scoff and would tell Sentry that he already has contingencies just in case he loses control of his overwhelming power. Sentries would discuss his worries even further, but Norman would reassure him that everything will be fine and that this should be a quick in and out mission, and it will only be a way to invoke fear into Count Nefaria, as well as any other enemies that think they could stand in the Dark Avengers' way. And with that, Sentry would leave the room, still unsure of himself, and the Dark Avengers would deploy to Count Nefaria's castle. And so we would see the Dark Avengers inside of a Quinjet, where they're arriving at the central location of the castle, which is located in Europe. And I want to use this scene to really explore the team's dynamic and how each of the members interact with each other. So inside of the Quinjet, we would see Bullseye doing target practice, and Leader would get visibly annoyed. Can't you do that anywhere else? Bullseye would scoff at Leader before saying that maybe I should use your gigantic head as a target, but no, that'd be too easy. Leader would take offense to this. For your information, I am one of, if not the smartest being on this planet, whilst you, on the other hand, are a low-life street marksman. Winter Soldier would say that since they're all in a team, we should all try to get along, wouldn't you all agree? Moonstone laughs. I couldn't give a damn about any one of you. I'm just here for the money and the fame. Sentry would look at Moonstone before saying, there's more to life than money, you know. The world is full of infinite possibilities. Spare me the lecture, Point Break. Abomination would add on, saying he doesn't really care about any one of them either, but he's just here for the ride. Radioactive Man would be curious. So what's your guys' stories? I know I'm the one in the hazmat suit, but if I take it off, everyone on this plane would be dead. Sentry would start off saying he was a test subject in order to find the inhuman gene in certain individuals, but apparently the test went horribly wrong and gave him an assortment of superhuman abilities, as well as something deep within him that wishes to do nothing but destroy and kill. I fear that if this being manages to get free, then no one on Earth would be able to stop it.
Scary! Shiver my timbers!
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we're almost there. Norman would say before his attention would be shifted towards the front of the Quinjet, where he would see a figure making its way towards the aircraft. From the outside perspective, this figure would be known as Whirlwind, who was sent by Count Nefaria to intercept the intruders, as he knew that the Americans would have sent someone to capture them by now. And so Whirlwind would use his powers and create a vortex in an attempt to crash the aircraft. Norman Osborn would lose control of the Quinjet and it would go spiraling around. This would cause all of the Dark Avengers to eject from the Quinjet, and they all would make their way towards the ground, with the ones who can fly helping the ones who can't to make it safely to the ground level, whilst Norman Osborn would head to the eye of the storm and confront Whirlwind in a vicious battle. Whirlwind has the upper hand since he is in his element and would create multiple vortexes to throw off the Iron Patriot and throw him around. Iron Patriot would be flung towards the ground and crash with an audible loud noise. And so Whirlwind would taunt the Dark Avengers, saying that there is no one in here that could stop him. And so Sentry would fly up and confront Whirlwind and would proceed to defeat him in a simple flurry of attacks, knocking him out and placing him down on the ground. The team would ask Sentry how the hell did he manage to get past Whirlwind's defenses, and Sentry would just say that Whirlwind was no match for him, but he does feel bad for knocking him out like that. It appears that they already know that we're here, given that they have sent us a welcome wagon, Leader says. Norman Osborn would fly out of the crater that he was left in by Whirlwind and land on the ground. At least we can skip the negotiation phase. The castle shouldn't be that far from here, so we'll make the rest of the way on foot. Everyone stay sharp. And so the Dark Avengers would make their way to Count Nefarious' castle. The scene would shift to a person who seems to be running in haste before stopping midway and would appear to be talking to another person. My king, there has been reports of a hurricane just under 12 miles from here. The figure would look up and we wouldn't see his face, and he'll simply say, "Is that so? Well then, I guess I must look into it." And the figure would make his way out of the room and fly up towards the air, and would proceed to make his way towards the Dark Avengers location. The Dark Avengers would arrive at the castle, where we would see Count Nefaria, as well as his other soldiers and the other members of the Lethal Legion, armed and ready to attack. Norman Osborn would be the one to step in front, informing Count Nefaria that this is his last chance to surrender and submit to the American law. Count Nefaria would snarl, "Filthy American dog, what kind of a fool do you take me for? Men, get ready to attack." Count Nefaria's soldiers would arm their weapons and tighten their grip on their guns, as well as the other members of the Lethal Legions getting ready to use their powers. And so, Iron Patriot would grin behind his mask and would proceed to say, "Avengers, assemble." And so the Dark Avengers would dash towards the army, as well as the army dashing towards the Dark Avengers, which would result in a clash between powers. Iron Patriot would fly straight towards Count Nefaria, in which the two would proceed to have an epic battle, with Count Nefaria using his superhuman abilities of super strength as well as ionic energy output to counter Iron Patriot's repulsor beams. Bullseye would be striking down the soldiers as well as Winter Soldier gunning them down. Abomination would also be seen bulldozing through Count Nefaria's forces, that is, until the living laser would use his energy beams to blast away Abomination, sending him flying, and so Moonstone would counter by dashing towards the living laser and proceed to engage in an ultimate fight. But due to the living laser's energy absorption, he manages to overwhelm Moonstone and would proceed to take her down. We would also see Ares making quick work of Radioactive Man, and so Sentry would dash towards him, in which the two would appear to be in a stalemate, with Ares matching Sentry's strength. Ares would even compliment Sentry. You're better than the rest," before sending an uppercut to Sentry, sending him flying towards the air. But Ares would jump up as well, grabbing Sentry by the ankle and slamming him down back on the ground, and would proceed to slam him multiple times before throwing him away. Leader would attempt to attack Ares' mind and attempt to attack him from a distance, but Ares would sense this and would proceed to charge at Leader, attempting on dealing a killing blow. That is, until Sentry would appear from behind Ares and would stop him in his tracks and would restrain Ares just for a minute, but Ares would grab Sentry's face and slam him down on the ground once more before stomping on him and kicking him away. Sentry would be flung, and in this scene we would see his inner dialogue as he's trying to control his power, which is continued to rise as he gets more and more frustrated, until he would hear a voice telling him to kill everyone on the battlefield. Sentry would try to repress this force as best as he could, but his emotions were getting the better of him, until we would see him start to snap his eyes open, and a loud boom would immerse towards the battlefield, resulting in multiple amounts of ash and dust in the air, or in the distance it would appear as a column of red energy was commersing from the sky. Everyone would proceed to stop their fights and look at Sentry, wondering what the hell was going on, until we would see a figure emerge from the dust, and it would appear to be Sentry, but it would appear that he has taken a more reddish tone, and his voice would be different too, as he would proceed to say, "Well then, shall we begin?" And Sentry, or the figure who would appear to be Sentry, would dash towards Ares, grabbing him by the neck and slamming him on the ground, which would create multiple craters. Ares would proceed to jump out of the crater and attempt to attack Sentry, but Sentry would be way faster this time and would punch Ares away, sending him miles and miles across from the battlefield. And so the living laser would try to blast Sentry, but Sentry would be too powerful and would appear in front of the living laser, grabbing him by the neck and ripping his arm off. It was so fast that the living laser couldn't even process it, and the Sentry would proceed to snap his neck and throw him away as if he was unwanted trash. Sentry's eyes would then dart and meet Count Nefaria's, who would feel a tinge of fear now, and Sentry would dash towards Nefaria, and before Nefaria could react, Sentry would place a fist through his abdomen, and it would exit through Count Nefaria's back, killing the dictator. And Count Nefaria's body would fall limply towards the ground. So Sentry would look back at the other soldiers, who would proceed to run away in fear now. And he would look back at the other members of the Dark Avengers as well. And so Iron Patriot would be a little bit hesitant before congratulating Sentry on a job well done. That is, until Sentry would backhand Iron Patriot, and Iron Patriot would go flying. The other members of the team would tense up, and Sentry would begin to say, "The man that you once knew is taking a little break right now, and so I am here and instead. You can call me the Void." And as if on cue, the Void would dash towards the team, attempting on killing each and every one of them. That is, until Iron Patriot would tackle Sentry and use his unibeams to try and restrain him and blast him away. This would send Sentry flying a couple dozen feet, but he would use his arms to block the unibeam. Until Iron Patriot would also activate his missiles and aim it towards Sentry, which would debilitate him enough to send him flying a couple fields. Moonstone would ask Iron Patriot, "What now, genius?" Iron Patriot would look at Moonstone, and he would proceed to about to answer. That is, until he would look up, and it would appear as if Norman Osborn behind the mask would have seen a ghost. Ah, shit. Moonstone would ask Iron Patriot, "What is it?" before she would look up as well, and would say, "Oh, you gotta be kidding me." Up in the sky, we would see a figure making its way towards the Dark Avengers, and it would appear to be Thor. Bullseye would ask Iron Patriot where the hell they were again, and Iron Patriot would scan the map and would realize that this was near the new settlement that Thor and the Asgardians have placed New Asgard in, and would proceed to scold himself on not even checking on the information before. And so Thor, up in the air, would use his powers to summon lightning and dash towards the Dark Avengers, landing his hammer with an audible crack and crash, scattering the Dark Avengers, sending each and one of them flying into opposite directions. "What is the meaning of this?" says Thor. Iron Patriot would try and regain his footing. That is, until his head would dart towards the location where he sent Sentry, and as if on cue, the Void would come flying towards the area, and he would land with a loud crash in front of Thor. The Void would emerge from the dust and would look at Thor, proceeding to say, "Well then, this is a surprise. I wonder what it must feel like to kill a god. Let me find out." Thor would be unfazed and would dash at the Void. The Void would do the same, resulting in an ultimate clash between power versus malice. Thor would strike Sentry using Mjolnir, but Sentry would tank it and would proceed to dash at Thor, punching him in the face. Thor would go flying before he would stop himself and gain his footing, but Sentry would follow up with an uppercut to the chin, sending Thor flying through the air. Thor would stop midair, and Sentry would gain speed following him, in which the two would embrace in another clash, in which Thor would tug Sentry by the cape and throw him around, throwing him to the opposite direction, where he would proceed to dash towards Sentry and punching him in the stomach several times before finally finishing it off with a hammer punch, sending Sentry further up into the air. Sentry would stop himself and would proceed to rocket down towards Thor and slamming him onto the ground below, creating multiple craters and dust. The Dark Avengers would look at this display of power in awe, and so Thor would rise up from the crater as well as Sentry, and the two would engage yet again. Thor would proceed to throw Mjolnir at Sentry, who would dodge and would proceed to dash towards Thor and engage him with a flurry of attacks before Thor would call back Mjolnir and it would hit Sentry in the back of the head, stunning him a bit, which would allow Thor to follow up with the combo by slamming Mjolnir up against Sentry's nose. Thor would then kick Sentry in the torso and would follow through, sending a barrage of lightning at Sentry, who would be more than stunned and would dart back, trying to gain some distance from Thor. Here we would see Sentry start to grow more unhinged as more of the Void's power would begin to take over him, and we would see him start to sprout red tendrils, in which he would proceed to dash at Thor. Thor would dodge, but Sentry would grab his arm using one of his tendrils and slam him back down on the ground. The Void would then proceed to wrap his tendrils around Thor's neck, attempting to strangle him. That is until Ares would come from behind Sentry and backhands him, sending him flying. Thor would get up and look at Ares, unsure whether to make of this new opponent as his ally or his enemy. But there wouldn't be any time for that, as the Void would quickly gain his footing and would dash at the pair, and so Thor and Ares would not exchange a single word with each other, but instead dash at the Void together, and which would unleash an ultimate combo, in which Sentry would proceed to punch the Void in the nose, which would allow Thor to throw a lightning-infused Mjolnir at the Void's chest, and this would debilitate the Void just for a moment, when Ares would follow through with a hammer punch down to the ground, in which Thor would also follow through with the combo, swinging Mjolnir up, hitting the Void in the nose once again. The Void would spaz out and enlarge its tendrils to get Thor and Ares away from him, and Thor and Ares would back off. That is until Unibeam would hit the Void straight in the chest, sending him flying a couple feet, and which we would see Iron Patriot using his Unibeam to debilitate the Void, as well as Moonstone using her powers to help out. And all of a sudden, the Void would feel a pain in his head, and he would proceed to clutch his face, in which we would see Leader in an attempt to try to control the Void and stop Sentry from his rampage. Sentry would resist and would look at Leader and would proceed to dash at him, attempting to kill. Leader would try to get away, but it would be too late, as the Void would use his gigantic claws to slash at the Leader's chest, and enormous amounts of blood would pour out. The Leader would still be alive, but would be severely injured, and so Thor would try to tackle the Void, but the Void would resist and proceed to backhand Thor, sending him flying. Abomination would also try to have a go at the Void, but the Void would prove to be too much, as he would simply defeat Abomination using his momentum against him. The Void would proceed to break Abomination's arm and knee him in the face, breaking his nose and sending him flying a dozen feet. Radioactive Man will attempt to use his powers to slow down the Void, which would work momentarily and would allow Ares to deal a flurry of combos amongst the Void, which would work effectively, and then Thor would wake up and fly up to the air, trying to gain momentum as he would summon storm and lightning clouds. Winter Soldier and Bullseye will attempt to help by shooting their guns at the Void's eyes, attempting to blind him, and which the Void would proceed not to be affected by it, but it would serve as a distraction, along with Radioactive Man using his powers to slow the Void down, and Ares holding him in place. Thor would then dash towards the ground with a lightning-infused Mjolnir, and would proceed to bash the Void's head with Mjolnir, igniting a large crack, which would send out shockwaves for miles, sending everyone into opposite directions, and would create another cloud of dust and ash. And so the dust would settle, where we would see Sentry unconscious and back to normal. And so, with the battle won, Iron Patriot, as well as the rest of the members of the Dark Avengers, would proceed to call in the Quinjet and try and collect Sentry, but Thor would stop them, stating that Sentry is too powerful to be left in the hands of the Law of You, so he'll be staying with me for the time being. Iron Patriot would try to protest, but one look from Thor would shut him up instantly, and so the rest of the Dark Avengers would return back to New York. And as for Ares, he would go on his own way, searching for the next challenge. And so the Dark Avengers would return to New York, but not until being confronted by none other than the Avengers, containing Iron Man, Captain America, Giant Man, Wasp, Hawkeye, and Spider-Man as well, donning a new black suit. What is the meaning of this? Says Iron Patriot. Captain America would step forward. The meaning, Norman Osborn, is that you are under arrest. After what Thor informed us, you are in violation of trying to invade a foreign land. Moonstone would protest. We weren't trying to invade anyone. We were just trying to kill one guy. Wrong. Invading literally means forcibly intruding onto another land and causing destruction, which I'm pretty sure all of you did. So yeah, you guys are under arrest. Iron Patriot would snarl. I'd like to see you bastards try, which would result in a final clash between the Avengers and the Dark Avengers. But due to the Dark Avengers' recent battle with Sentry, they are all tired, and the Avengers would manage to take them down in a swift motion. Not to mention, the Dark Avengers are still relatively a new team, and they haven't gotten used to working alongside each other, so during the battle, most of them will just get in each other's way. This would contrast to the Avengers, who spent years fighting with each other, and thus have perfect synergy. Iron Man, along with Spider-Man, would proceed to double uppercut the Iron Patriot, sending him flying towards the ground. Moonstone would try to attack Giant Man, but Hawkeye would be there in the nick of time, using one of his arrows to debilitate her powers, thus causing enough of a distraction for Wasp to land a finishing blow, blasting Moonstone in the face and knocking her out. Abomination is handicapped due to his broken arm from Sentry, which would allow Giant Man to swiftly defeat him by punching him down into the earth, creating a crater. Captain America would make quick work of Radioactive Man and Leader, and would confront Bucky Barnes, attempting to talk to him. The two would then engage in a long conversation, which would result in Bucky turning his ways and abandoning the Dark Avengers, as well as joining Captain America as well as the Avengers in defeating them. Iron Patriot would be enraged and would set him to attack Bucky, but that would be until Iron Man would blast him away using his Unibeam, and Spider-Man would follow through with a kick to Iron Patriot's face, knocking his helmet off of his head. Iron Patriot would be down at the ground, defeated, and would look up to see the Avengers standing over him. Bullseye, after seeing the display of Sentry as well as the carnage before him, would slip away from the battle, deciding that it isn't worth it, and would go away undetected. Norman Osborn would be on the ground, defeated, and on his knees. He would look up at Spider-Man. Norman would snarl at disgust and spit at Spider-Man's feet. This would result in Spider-Man knocking Norman out with a swift punch, ending the battle, and thus the Dark Avengers would be taken into custody. And we would see a scene of Justin Hammer watching the news of the Dark Avengers getting arrested with a smile on his face, as this would be revealed to be his plan all along, to get Norman out of the way so he can take full control over Oscorp. We would also see Harry watching the news as well. Depressed as ever, we would see him drinking a mysterious green liquid, and it would look as if it was not his first time indulging in such a product. And we would look deeper into his eyes, where we would see tints of green in them, and he would slowly start to smile. And so the screen would cut to black. And we would also get a post-credit scene of Thanos walking towards a room where he would house the Infinity Gauntlet. He would put it on, mumbling to himself, "Fine, I'll do it myself." End scene. Well, that was my phase 4 of What If Marvel Still Had All of the Character Rights. And my apologies that this video took so long to come out. It was just a multitude of factors, but I'm not even going to try to make an excuse. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and stay tuned as I have many more projects down the line. So with that, I'll see you guys later, and take care.